Good afternoon and welcome to SnapTech IT's monthly webinar. My name is Ted Hulsey. I'm Chief Revenue Officer for SnapTech IT and your host for today's event. Thanks for joining in for the live session. This webinar will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. The topic for today is Navigating Cybersecurity Changes in 2023, a guide for business leaders. Today, I am joined by SnapTech founder and president, Sean Brown. Sean, welcome to today's call.
Ted, thanks for having me. Good to get together again for another webinar. Hopefully we'll share some good information today with the people here and through the recording. So excited to be here and help out.
All right, awesome. And I want to encourage all of our live attendees, please ask us questions as we go along. So let's look at the agenda. First of all, there you are. You see us again there on the screen. Let's look at the agenda. So the way we're going to divide and conquer today's presentation is I'm going to take the first section here and talk about the 5 big trends in cybersecurity in 2023. And then we're going to change gears, and Sean's going to pick up and talk about how SnapTech IT addresses those challenges for our clients. And how do we drive best practices? How do we help organizations adapt to this threat ecosystem? So that's how we're going to carve up the agenda. And then we've got time for formal Q&A at the end of today's presentation. So please drop your questions in the Q&A feature as we go along, and we'll try to address your questions on the fly, but we'll also have a formal Q&A section. One thing we want to do always is make sure our audience just knows a little bit about SnapTech. I mean, some of the folks who are on the call today are existing clients. Others are companies that are really new to us. So SnapTech IT, we are a nationwide managed service provider with operations in Atlanta, Georgia, Phoenix, Arizona, and San Francisco, California. We serve our clients in 2 different ways. The first is what we call fully managed IT services. So this is where a company will outsource 100% of their IT or technology needs to us as their service provider. That's probably the most common way we serve clients. And then the other way is what we call co-managed IT. And this is where an organization already has an IT team or an IT manager, and the company might be growing. The company might have a bunch of strategic initiatives where you need outside help in the area of IT, and you want to outsource some aspect of your IT stack to a third-party company, and that's what we call co-managed IT. So that's a little bit about us. The rest of today's conversation is really going to be a discussion about what we're seeing in the marketplace and how we serve clients. So let's get into it and talk about some of those big trends we're seeing. So the first one is ransomware. Ransomware continues to be one of the biggest plagues and challenges in the IT arena for organizations of all sizes. I think it's always important to define what we mean by ransomware. Today, a ransomware attack is where the bad actors, the threat actors, will gain access to your network environment and find some way to encrypt the workstations or servers inside the organization, and then turn around and demand a ransom, a form of financial payment to get the encryption keys to decrypt the environment. And so ransomware, the good news is most of the time, the organization will eventually get the encryption keys to decrypt the environment. The bad news is companies suffer massive amounts of downtime, reputational problems because they can't serve their clients during the midst of the attack. And then the other thing that happens often in a ransomware attack is the threat actors today, more and more, will kind of do a 1-2 punch or a double whammy, if you will. They will oftentimes steal a lot of intellectual property or inside information or private confidential information from the organization, then launch the ransomware attack, then request the ransomware payment, and then turn around and then say, well, actually, by the way, we need to ask you to give us more money, otherwise we'll release some of your data to the public out on the internet. So Data exfiltration or data theft is another dimension to the ransomware problem. It's probably useful to look at a little data on what we're seeing in the marketplace today. So the next couple slides, SonicWall is one of the big security vendors in the space, and they do a really good annual threat report. And some of this data on ransomware comes from their threat report. What you see is that in 2022, in the past year, the actual overall volume of ransomware declined pretty significantly year over year. But what you see is that 2021 was really a high watermark in terms of the overall amount of ransomware attacks globally. It's kind of hard to explain why the pandemic and the remote work trend all culminated in this huge crescendo of ransomware, but it certainly did. So one of the big additional downsides of the pandemic was lots and lots of organizations in the past couple of years have faced the threat of ransomware. And when you look at what business decision makers and leaders are worried about, ransomware continues to top the list. Next up on the list is phishing and spear phishing attacks, which is a form of social engineering attack, other forms of malware, and the list goes on. But ransomware really remains the top of the list in terms of concerns. So let's go to the second big trend. The second big trend is that organizations continue to face very sophisticated intrusion attempts of all kinds. The overall volume of intrusion attempts on organizations in SonicWall's estimation in 2022 was 6.3 trillion. So obviously a lot. I think what they did see in 2022, again, kind of aligned with what we saw in the ransomware world, is that there was a dip in moderate or severe intrusion attempts in 2022. So they fell quite a significant amount, 10% year over year. But intrusions, this is really how the bad guys will get a foothold in an organization. And getting that foothold is the critical first step for the threat actors to expand, get their tentacles into the rest of the organization to launch, say, a broad-based ransomware attack. And what the threat actors are often exploiting is unpatched systems. So the challenge organizations face today is they've got a very complex software ecosystem. You've got servers and workstations, and you've got line of business applications, and you've got just legacy software applications, and then you've got SaaS tools. And the reality, and then your network infrastructure and additional devices inside of a network. The reality is all of this infrastructure, all of these systems need to be patched and maintained proactively and quickly, because there are always vulnerabilities being discovered, bugs being discovered, and these vulnerabilities will be exploited. And these exploits allow these threat actors to get a toehold inside of a network and then do further damage. And so this is an example of all the different kinds of intrusion attacks that will occur, and a lot of these are caused because systems are unpatched. The third big trend we're seeing is that cybercriminals, the cybercrime ecosystem today is very, very sophisticated. First of all, you've got to think about cybercrime that it's almost like a mafia type operation. But the interesting thing is that these mafia guys are kind of going legit, if you will, in the sense that they are more and more operating like mainstream businesses. So here on the right, you see a screenshot. This is from Sophos's 2023 threat report. And all of these threat reports, by the way, are available on Sophos's website and SonicWall's website. So I do encourage you to dig in. You can go there, download these reports, and read up in further detail. But what Sophos has observed is that the bad guys are operating more and more like legitimate businesses. So you see here that this organization is advertising a phishing toolkit to other hackers, and they're advertising what's great about their approach is, well, they have client satisfaction is their top priority. You can reach us 24/7. So we have great response times, and so they're literally behaving. They're marketing hacking tools to other criminals, but they're advertising their customer service as a reason that people should buy from them. So a couple more examples of this. There's literally almost like an we talk often in the tech ecosystem about everything as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. Well, there's also cybercrime as a service, it turns out. And this screenshot here is saying this organization is advertising, oh, well, we have this exploit toolkit. You can pay a $700 one-time fee or pay us on a monthly basis. You can subscribe to continuous updates for this hacking tool. And there's a cybercrime ecosystem. And really, the main point is that this is what we're up against. And the other point to make is that it's a large ecosystem. We're talking literally over the world, tens of thousands of people who are involved in this criminal enterprise, because you can literally attack somebody from the other side of the globe. All you need is a computer. All you need is the desire to be a bad actor, and you can source a lot of the tools right out on the internet, on the dark web, to actually do your damage. And so the barriers to entry are rather low. And what this means for organizations is that this is who we're up against. Is you as a company leader need to realize that there's an entire army of cyber criminals arrayed against the legitimate business world, and we need to work together as technology vendors, as service providers, and organizations to combat this threat and mitigate these pretty significant risks. So let's talk about, so those are the first three challenges. Let's talk about the fourth big challenge we're seeing. Cyber liability insurance is a huge part of the overall risk management equation for organizations. Sean's going to go through, some of the best practices that we recommend for organizations to defend themselves. But one important layer of defense is having cyber liability insurance. Cyber liability insurance comes into play. It really provides a company with the financial resources when and if the worst case scenario happens. If there is indeed a breach or a ransomware attack or a massive theft of data or some sort of cyber breach of any kind, whenever that occurs, there are going to be massive costs. You're going to have legal costs, you're going to have investigation costs, you're going to have downtime, the cost of downtime in your business, you're going to have the cost of bringing in technical experts to get yourself back up and running. And cyber liability insurance is a layer of defense that we consider really a must-have. But the interesting thing is what's happening is that while cyber liability insurance is becoming more mainstream, for most companies, it's becoming much more complicated to get and renew your policies. So what you see at one level is that the more and more organizations are buying into cyber liability insurance as an important risk management maneuver. More and more have specific coverage for ransomware attacks, which makes sense based upon what we saw with the earlier couple slides. But the other thing to really be mindful of is that, and we did a whole webinar on this last month. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can really spend a whole hour on cyber liability insurance alone. But the important thing we want to highlight for everybody is it's really, really vital to understand what you're buying when you buy a cyber liability policy, because there are oftentimes major exceptions or exclusions in the policy. You really need to understand what you're buying, because sometimes you think you're covered for certain things, and it may turn out that you're not. But let's peel back the onion here a little further. So what are companies seeing? First of all, the insurance carriers, the whole cyber liability category is probably 15 to 20 years old, and it's really grown tremendously in the past 10. The reality is a lot of the cyber liability insurance carriers have taken a beating because they've written a lot of policies and there's been a lot of losses because of the pandemic and the growth in ransomware attacks. And so what's happening is the insurance carriers are raising the bar and making it a lot harder to get coverage. And what they're really forcing on the insureds, the buyers of the insurance, the customers, is to really raise the bar on their own cyber liability or their own cyber protections so that we have fewer losses. So the insurance carriers really are defining, they're raising the bar in terms of requirements. They're forcing organizations to have better policies and procedures and cybersecurity controls. They're mandating that organizations invest in a greater amount of cyber protections. And so most organizations, when they're going to renew their policies, they're having to go through with a fine-tooth comb and understand if they're doing everything their policy requires. They're having to attest that they're doing these improved measures, and they're either having to work with their internal IT team or with their service provider to really raise the bar and put in place new levels of cyber defense and cyber protections, because that's the only way to keep the policy, and it's the only way to actually call on that policy when and if a worst case scenario happens. The last thing you want to have happen is you buy insurance, you have a loss, the insurance adjusters come in and say, well, wait a minute, you didn't do X, Y, and Z that you said you were doing. That can be turned into a situation where you're denied coverage. And so you really got to defend against that by making sure you follow through either with your internal IT team or with your service provider, and you actually implement the cyber defense improvements that are required to keep that insurance. Couple last observations before I turn things over to Sean and talk about where we could talk about best practices. The other important thing that's happening in the marketplace today is that the regulatory requirements continue to increase for cyber security. Every industry is different. There's many different verticals. Certain verticals are governed by industry associations. Others are governed by federal law. Some industries are highly regulated on a state-by-state basis in the United States, for example. But in general, regulators are viewing cybersecurity as an area where only goodness can come from raising the bar on people in terms of improving the cyber defenses they have in place and raising their cyber maturity. And so we'll just call out two industries that we often interact in, and clients that we work with in two different verticals, just as some examples. The first one I want to mention is the defense contracting space, or the defense industrial base. Manufacturers who ultimately supply the Pentagon, it's a massive part of the economy. And there's lots and lots of companies who make parts and components that end up getting assembled into final products by the large prime contractors like Boeing or Lockheed Martin, or General Dynamics, and that sort of thing. And the Defense Department is mandating that everybody in the supply chain in the defense industrial base is improving the level of their cyber maturity, improving the kinds of controls they have in place for their cyber defenses. And this is called CMMC, and it's a industry-wide initiative to raise the overall cyber defense levels in the industry. And so we often are working with manufacturers who need to really dramatically increase the amount of investment and effort they put into improving their cyber defenses. Another one is the financial arena. The Securities Exchange Commission regulates folks like financial advisors, broker dealers, a lot of different alternative asset managers and investor type organizations, real estate developers to some degree. And the SEC, one of their biggest areas of enforcement these days is cybersecurity. And so they are always raising the bar on financial organizations, because it's all about protecting the client ultimately. In the case of last case we were talking about CMMC, the ultimate client is the U.S. federal government, the Defense Department, and it's about protecting the secrets of the U.S. government ultimately through that whole supply chain. And in the case of the SEC, they're looking to, how do we have we need to have good, solid cybersecurity to protect all of the clients and organizations that play in our financial markets. And so this is an area of a lot of regulatory scrutiny. So what it means is that no matter what industry you're in, you need to be looking at what is the compliance dimension to your attention to cybersecurity. It's not enough just to have a healthy appetite to invest and get better in cybersecurity, you also need to understand the compliance environment you're operating in. So with that, let me turn things over to Sean and pick your brain a little bit and hand it over to you. I'll drive the slides, and so you just tell me when you want to advance. But Sean, talk to us about how we help clients respond to the 5 big trends we talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Ted, great job on the first part of this. I was a little surprised and shocked by one of the slides that some of the criminals actually have mission statements. I don't know if you picked that up or not, but I mean, how crazy is that? So, all right, so let's talk about embracing standards. And so you already touched on CMMC. So if that is an industry that you're in, that would be, one of the standards that you might embrace. If you're in the financial services, it's a different one. For a majority of small and medium businesses that are not in compliance-driven industries, they need something that they can use as well. And so one of the tools and frameworks that we like to kind of leverage and use for a lot of our kind of non-regulated customers is the NIST cybersecurity framework. So what is it? How was it created? Where did it kind of come from? It started back in 2014 with an executive order that was signed to improve the nation's cybersecurity kind of maturity in our small and medium businesses. Version 1.1 was published in April of 2018. I hear they're getting really close to releasing version 2.0. That it may be later on this year or beginning of next year when that'll eventually get published. But it's based basically on standards, guidelines, and kind of best practices for running good IT operations and cybersecurity. I joke with people all the time that the NIST cybersecurity framework is great because it's like everything you want to know as it relates to information security or cybersecurity. And the bad thing is, man, it's everything you want to know about protecting yourself. And so they break this down into what's called 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. For us, you can see on this graphic, we add a 6th one in there that we call manage, and that's just kind of the IT management kind of component that we usually bring to the table. So that's the reason why we kind of slipped in a 6th one there. But so it breaks down from those 5 functions. It has 23 kind of categories and 108 subcategories that kind of make up, if you will, this entire NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, some of the advantages and the reasons why we like to leverage a best practice framework like this is it provides a structured approach for us for cybersecurity. So, companies that are looking to improve their security maturity, this framework helps you identify your cybersecurity risk, prioritize them, and then create kind of a plan of action. And we'll kind of show some examples of that here in a minute. The other thing that it does is it helps you enhance your risk management. So one of the kind of categories in there is about risk management. So it teaches and helps you kind of take a proactive approach to managing risk inside the organization. The other benefit that we've seen is it helps build kind of customer and vendor trust. And so if you can communicate to your stakeholders, your customers, your vendors that, hey, we've adopted the NIST cybersecurity framework, that's just a great way to show your stakeholders and customers that you have taken cybersecurity seriously and that you've got a formal kind of plan of action and a system of best practices that you're following. The other thing it does is it really aligns with some of the other kind of frameworks, like if you're subject to GDPR or the PCI DSS kind of requirements, those really align well with this NIST cybersecurity framework as well. And then the other big benefit is it really provides like a common language for cybersecurity. So when we talk about, controls or solutions that are in the protect or detect technology, we all understand what we mean by protect versus detect. And so providing that common language is a huge help when we're talking about cybersecurity and reducing risk in an organization. So, all right, why don't we kick it down to the next slide. All right, so the second part, proven process. And so for us, you can see this is our proven process that we follow with all of our customers. And for us, it really starts with this IT discovery and risk assessment. And so the discovery piece is really about understanding the technology, really trying to figure out that identify section, if you will, that's part of that NIST framework. And then the risk assessment piece that we do is based on the NIST cybersecurity framework and kind of evaluating an organization based on those 5 functions and those 108 controls that are kind of part of it. From there, we go on to onboarding, remediation, support. The big part about that is it's just about having a good proven process that you're following. We've got a roadmap. And regardless of whether you use ours or you kind of create your own, having some formalized kind of proven process that you're going to follow in your organization to kind of help you go from identifying kind of where you're at, developing kind of plans, and creating budgets and remediation projects to kind of move you from kind of where you're at to where you want to be. So, all right, let's kick it over to the next, which is. Oh, we're still in the assessment one. I forgot about this one that we put in. So for us, that assessment process is really simple. It's a 3-step process. We go through a discovery. We do that analysis and assessment kind of piece of it. And then finally, the big part of it is recommendations. And so we do these all the time. Honestly, it's one of my favorite things that we do at the beginning of this process, because I love being able to go in and helping people understand exactly kind of where they're at, understanding what risk that we see in the environment, and then helping them kind of paint the future of what the organization might look like. Like we're in the middle of one of these right now where they still have some on-prem servers in the environment. They're still leveraging some VPN technology to access some of this data. And as part of our kind of recommendation piece, we're now talking about how we, leverage the cloud more, how we can move some of these systems from an on-prem environment to a more accessible, cloud-based environment, and really kind of paint the picture of not what, how they operate today, but what is possible and how we can build more scalable, elastic kind of systems in the environment. So that's a lot of fun for us in doing that and helping companies kind of take that next step and continue to move forward. So,
and Sean, and everybody's unique, but you said something the other day, which I thought was pretty important, which is we always find something. Like everybody's a work in progress of a different kind, but talk to us a little bit about what are some of the things we would find in a cyber risk assessment, or talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you, we've been doing this for a long time, and we have never done one of these and not found significant security gaps or risk in an environment. So we find all kinds of things when we're doing this. One of the big, more common things that we find is users that got put into like a domain administrator group, and they've just forgotten that they were there. And so they've got escalated privileges that they may or may not need in the environment. If your primary user is in that kind of domain admin group, that's typically not a good best practice, right? Because you don't want to operate day to day on an account that is got full access to everything and can install and do anything that you want. So that's a big one that we find. Another big one that we find is poorly managed firewalls. We find gaps in, patching. So patching and vulnerability management. And so a lot of people, turn on like a Windows, patch management system and say, well, it's automated and Microsoft is patching everything. If that were only the case, Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way, nor do those Microsoft kind of auto patches patch things like switches and firewalls and line of business applications and Zoom and Adobe. Those all need to be patched as well, because those all have vulnerabilities as well. So we find things like that. We find backups are a big thing that we see. So we see a lot of people that either have failed backups in the environment, or we find where the backup is there and it's working, but it's on a machine called backup that is also part of the domain. And the significant piece of that is if I'm able, as an attacker, to gain access into the environment, and if the machine that's called backup is on the same network, if you will, and has the same rights, if I'm on one machine, I could pretty easily get over to that one. And the first thing that they're going to do is go delete those backups, which was unfortunately a story that we heard from a new client that we started working with. That was the situation that happened with them. But those are just some examples. The other things that we find too, that we found old MSP accounts from not the previous MSP or even the previous MSP before that, but even back to the third MSP, that were just never disabled. So that just strikes me as just not good process and not good management that's been going on in the environment. We find Office 365 licensing a lot that is, you bought the license, but it's not being leveraged or used. And so you're paying for licensing that you may not need. So there's all kinds of things like that we, kind of discover through this process.
So it's a very healthy process, all ways to save money, but really the huge dimension is risk management. What are the things that need, what's the low hanging fruit? What are the things that are going to make a real difference in the medium to long term in terms of improving the cyber posture of an organization? I mean, I guess maybe to transition, talk to the audience a little bit about our philosophy on evolution and continuous improvement.
Exactly. So we know that it's, some of this stuff is, there are time constraints, there are budget constraints, and quite frankly, you can't do it all at once. I always described it, this is a journey, not really a destination. And the reason why I kind of describe it that way is the attackers are always going to be evolving. They're going to be coming up with new creative ways. And so the things that we used to do in the past to protect an organization, unfortunately, are not the same things that we have to do today to protect an organization. And so it really is a process and a journey that we follow. And so part of our kind of process that we kind of follow is kind of creating things. And this is kind of a good example of this document that's called a plan of action, a milestone document, or just a kind of IT roadmap, if you will, to help, let's understand where we are today, and then let's go prioritize the risks that we found in an organization. And then what can we do to tackle, like you said, the low hanging fruit or the more critical things first? And a lot of times when we're developing these with customers, or if you guys are doing these on your own, think of this as really like an 18 to 24 month kind of plan of what you want to accomplish and what things are most important to get accomplished, and plot them out and kind of level them out, lay them out on some form of calendar or timeline. And then based on, budget and time, you get accomplished what you can get accomplished, but you've got a detailed plan of what the next project is and what the next initiative is. And it's really helpful too, if you kind of, as IT people, if we can understand where the organization is going, what the 3-year picture, if you will, for the company. Are we talking about doubling in size? Are we talking about opening new offices? Are we talking about going full remote? What's the game plan and the strategy for the organization? And then as IT, how do we make sure that we align technology to leverage where and help the company get to where they're trying to get to? So that's a big part of this kind of, planning out and handling kind of risk mitigation as well, is understanding kind of where we're going so that we can make sure that we properly align the technology to get us there. So,
and I think, if I might, Sean, just to make a brief comment about, we talked a lot about regulatory scrutiny and compliance, and a big part of that is that the regulators and in these different compliance mandates, they have a very healthy, realistic attitude around continuous improvement and how how big of a challenge it is for a lot of organizations to make all of these investments and improvements. And so one of the really important things you have to do with your regulators often is to be able to document and show them your plan of action and milestones, and to show the progress you've made against it. And that's usually, like, it's sufficient. Like, nobody's, expecting you to wave a magic wand and be perfect overnight. What they want to see is methodical improvement over time and have that documented. And so, like, if you ever hear about, like, in the financial arena, when the SEC will do an audit of a financial advisor, one of the things they're going to ask for is, they're going to say, show us your plan of action and milestones on your IT and cyber infrastructure. And if you're able to come and then show them, well, look at all this progress we've made in the past 24 months, you're in a much, much better position with your regulators if you're actually executing against the plan.
Yeah. And we've seen all kinds in this, right? So we've walked into organizations that were, really well put together. And then, quite frankly, I've walked into my fair share of organizations that were really not very well put together. Like, just a quick story. I mean, we started working with a client a couple of years ago. Firewalls were in place, but they had no licensing on them. So they really were not doing anything. And there was some misconfiguration in it. So it was allowing some traffic in and out that it really shouldn't have. They had old on-prem servers that were out of warranty, and the operating systems were about to go end of life. They had 365 licensing that they were paying for that weren't assigned to users. So that was an opportunity to save them money. Backups were installed, even though they were on the same network on, I don't remember the exact name of the server, but we'll call it backup. And so nobody would ever find that if they kind of broke in. They had a lot of old accounts that were still on the domain that were no longer at the company. That's a big one we find a lot. And just the whole environment, I think, was just really poorly managed, from the get-go. And so with time, budget constraints, like I said, you can't do everything, but putting together a plan like this really helps. That's been a couple of year project that we've kind of been working with them to kind of modernize and kind of move them to the cloud. So now they've got new firewalls, they've got wireless that's integrated. We've got this whole synchronized thing. So if endpoint detects that it's got something going on, firewall kicks it off the network and isolates it. So there's some really cool things like that we've been able to implement. We implemented our Office 365 security best practices that incorporate things like country blocking, so that nobody can email you from certain countries to reduce spam. We do things like conditional access. So if you haven't got conditional access set up in 365, that's another thing that we recommend. And basically what that is that says where someone is allowed to log into your Office 365 from. So for example, for our organization, you can't log into 365 except for in the United States. So anytime anybody kind of travels outside of the United States, we always have to open that up while they are in the middle of traveling. But those are just some 365 kind of best practices that we're able to kind of put in. We also help implement awareness training. And so if you're not doing awareness training, that's another big one that needs to be put in place. And really what we're trying to do there is build just a culture of security inside the organization. Because we can put all the technology and solutions in place, but if an attacker is able to trick an end user and you don't have some other security kind of controls in place, they have a potential to gain access to the environment. So, but those are just some examples of kind of how we've kind of used that kind of discovery, planning, and to kind of get them to a much better spot. So let's talk managed services for a minute. We already kind of touched a little bit on the importance of kind of vulnerability management and patching and kind of how that works and how that helps protect an environment. What, to me, though, the biggest thing that we see is it's really about having a process-driven approach to IT management and security. So it's not uncommon for us to discover, during our risk assessment, that end users, like I said, have been put in a domain admin group that provides them kind of complete control over the environment. And it's not because it was kind of poorly managed, but because they don't have a process to go back and check and find things like that they accidentally did, or they opened a port on a firewall because they were troubleshooting something and they forgot to close it back. Those are things that we see a lot. But I'm a big proponent of processes and procedures, and so being able to create solutions for your environment where you've got standards, you've got procedures in place, and then you've got an automated way to detect whenever some of those settings are not, or they've been changed. So those are some of the things that we do from a process standpoint that are really important to kind of implement. It's one thing to have, things set up the way you think that they need to be, but you got to have a way to audit it, and you got to have a way to detect when it's not that way. So being real process driven in managed services for me is one of the most important things. It's really not about what technology gets deployed or what, but it's really about developing good IT kind of management processes in your environment. And then lastly, we'll just kind of touch on kind of zero trust technology and this thing we call application control. So this is really not a new kind of concept. It's been around in the enterprise for a long time, but it's relatively new to the SMB market. And so just real quick, zero trust technology is just kind of an information security kind of framework, if you will, that basically says never trust anybody or any device and always verify. It assumes that basically all users, devices, applications are always trying to do something malicious. So never trust anything is kind of the concept of this kind of zero trust. And when we get into kind of application control, by default, Windows was kind of designed to be very open, and pretty much with the right permissions, it will let you install anything you want on it, which is really helpful if you are trying to install something to get your job done. But it's also really harmful if you're an attacker or someone's attacking you, because they pretty much can install anything they want. They can install plugins, they can install malware, they can run macros in an Office application, for example. And what application control is it's the ability to kind of go in and catalog every piece of software, every plugin that's running in your environment. You learn it, you approve it, and then once you flip the switch, nothing else can ever be installed in the environment without IT approval. So I would say if you could only implement one security control in 2013, this would be the one that I would recommend you implement. Being able to go to a zero trust environment and not allowing anything to be executed is definitely a great security control to put in place.
All right. Okay. So with that, I think we'll go to formal. So thank you, Sean. So 5 best practices. Let's go to some of the questions. So Sean, maybe just a little bit unpack how application control works, like on a very practical level. So when an organization, when we go in and help a client and implement application control, what's the user experience? I mean, how do things work day to day?
Yep. So that's a great question. We get that a good bit. So like I said, the first step of that is we'll deploy out that software. Users won't even see it getting deployed, but we'll deploy it out, very silent install. And we put it into this learning mode. And what learning mode is doing is really going through and cataloging like I said, every piece of software that's running on it, whether it's, Microsoft Office or Zoom or, whatever the situation, whatever line of business applications you're running. It also catalogs all of the like Chrome plugins and things like that are running because those are attack vector as well. And so it catalogs all of that information. And then we sit down with kind of, the decision makers at the organization and our IT team. We go through and validate, yes, that should be allowed to run. No, that shouldn't. Obviously we don't have to go through every one. We know things like, Adobe and Zoom and Office 365 and things like that need to be allowed to be able to run. But we'll go through that list. And if there's anything kind of questionable, we'll do some research and make sure that, yes, in fact, that piece of software needs to run in an environment. If it doesn't, then we'll find the machines that it's on and go uninstall it. And then from that point, when we're ready, we'll kind of flip the switch and lock down the environment. And so if I'm, an end user and I need to install something that's not already on our approved list, if I go to install it and I have rights to do an install, which not everybody does, but if I do, if I go to install something, I'll get a pop-up on my screen that basically says, this is not an approved piece of software. Would you like to request approval? And so when they do that, it creates a ticket for our SOC team to go through, validate the application, and approve that software. And when we do that, then they're able to install it, or we'll push it out for them. Now, the flip side is if you don't have a piece of software installed, let's say you've got a Zoom meeting coming up, but Zoom is an approved piece of software, or GoToWebinar is an approved piece of software that's on the list, and I have the rights to install, and I go try to do an install. If it's already on the approved list, then it just installs and works as normal. It only gets blocked whenever it's something new that's already not approved in the environment.
Right. So this is what we call change management at some level, right? So we're making sure that no user, just because they want to install something, can make a decision. You want to have a process where you methodically digest the change that comes your way, and that somebody who's in the chain of command will sign off, in cooperation with our technicians, will sign off on the change management request to approve a piece of software to be installed. And that's how the experience is for our clients and for the users. And the payoff is, if an attacker is trying to install ransomware or some piece of malware or code or executable on your machine, it also will not run because ThreatLocker, which is the brand of software we use to do this application control, will not allow that arbitrary malware to be installed on your machines. And that's where you get the massive payoff.
It's funny, Ted. So we do an internal pen test on ourselves every year as part of our SOC audit that we go through. And our internal pen testers were telling me, hey, I could get through a lot of stuff, but that application control busted me every time. I'm like, fantastic, good.
Right. It's great. It's great feedback. So talk to us a little bit about, there's another question on patching. How does it work? How frequent does patching happen? What's going on in the background?
Yep. So I'll break patching up into two different kind of buckets. We've got server level patching, and we've got kind of PC and level patching. I guess I could throw in a third bucket, which would be the third-party applications that we also patch. And so when it comes to server level patching, we've got schedule maintenance windows with all of our customers. So depending on how we set up and configure that, but our team goes through and tests and reviews the patches and approves everything before we're kicking it out to our customer environments. And so that's how we kind of handle servers, is we have schedule maintenance windows, everything is tested and approved before it gets kind of deployed out into the customer environment. For PCs, Patch Tuesday is a big thing that Microsoft's been doing for a long time. We go through a very similar process, but without the patching window. So we do what's called daytime patching on PCs. And so our team reviews and approves those patches. And then if a PC missed its kind of next kind of patching window, if you will, or was turned off, the next time that machine is turned back on, it'll catch itself back up on the patching. So anytime the machine is on, 7 days a week from a PC standpoint, we'll do patching if it needs to be once it's been approved and kicked out. And then third-party patching works very similar to the PC kind of schedule as well. So we'll approve and kick out third-party patching as well. And those typically all run kind of in the background. You've probably seen a number of pop-ups on your screen that said, "Hey, we just updated, Zoom, for example, on your PC." So those are the kind of three buckets that I would kind of describe how we do patching.
And then maybe there's a question about the cyber risk assessment. So we talked about how when we onboard a new client, we'll always do that sort of discovery and cyber risk assessment process. Do we look at it again later in the relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, we've kind of done like another annual kind of checkup, if you will. We're changing our strategy on this a little bit. And so so let me back up. So we do kind of quarterly business reviews. And so quarterly, we sit down with our customers to kind of review this kind of plan, what happened in the past and kind of where are we moving in the future. And so our new kind of strategy and capabilities that we have are to be able to do, if we've got significant changes that happened in the environment, we're going to do that risk assessment, the NIST kind of questionnaire, if you will. We're going to go back and reevaluate that on the questions that we know that have changed and can be able to show progress either from baseline to where we currently are. So you can kind of see in this graphical form how we're mitigating and reducing risk in the environment, or we can kind of look at it from a quarter by quarter kind of, progression standpoint. And so we've got some really cool kind of graphics that we're putting together that enables us to kind of see where our risk kind of score was at the beginning and where we're at now. So pretty excited about that.
Right. So it's all about continuous improvement. And literally, we saw with, what the threat ecosystem and the cybercrime ecosystem looks like, they're at it 24/7. So we've got to be at it 24/7 with helping clients get better every day. So I think that exhausts all of our questions. Let's kind of talk about real briefly, Sean, you want to showcase what we're going to be talking about next month?
Now, this is one that I'm super excited about. So put this on your calendar, May 18th, 2 o'clock. So we're going to dive in and talk about my new favorite thing, ChatGPT. So if you're not familiar with ChatGPT, it is a online kind of website and tool that you can leverage to do all kinds of cool research and automation and development. I mean, we're starting to leverage it inside our organization for marketing and sales activities. We're leveraging it with our service team to more quickly find, resolution and answers to issues. I heard a really cool story just earlier today where someone leveraged ChatGPT. It was called Hustle GPT, I believe. And you could probably Google that and find it. But it was a guy that asked ChatGPT, if I've got $100, how can I start a business and make money? And so ChatGPT answered and provided all kinds of interesting ways to help kind of start and grow a business with a $100 budget. So if you can think it up, there's lots of cool technology and things that you can do to kind of leverage. And so we're going to dive into this and show examples of how you can leverage ChatGPT in your business, give you some examples of how we're using it, kind of show you the technology, and you know, show you what kind of cool things are possible with some of this AI that's out there now.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah, so super excited. Artificial intelligence, generative AI. We are huge fans. We're leveraging in our business every day, and we're working with clients they're discovering how to use it in real practical use cases. So we'll have live demos, a nice detailed explanation of how the technology works, and then we'll bring some real life use cases to the table. But with that, that concludes this month's SnapTech IT webinar. Thanks everybody for joining us live. An on-demand version of this recording will be available on our YouTube channel in a day or so. And thanks a lot for asking questions and in being engaged with us. And we look forward to seeing you on next month's webinar. Sean, thanks a lot. Take care, everybody.
Ted, thanks. See you next time.